comment on that?
Well, there was an interesting column in the Washington Post recently where it was moaning and groaning about the horrible Secret Service scandal and the GSA scandal. These are so horrible, they would undermine people's trust in the government. Well, of course, people should have no trust in the government, or rather, you can trust the government to always do the evil thing. I mean, if they can get away with it, if they don't do the evil thing, it's because they either haven't thought of it or they don't think it's in their own interests, or they can't get it together to do it, because, of course, government is the most incompetent agency ever to exist. Anybody who's ever been in the military or worked for the civilian part of the federal government and is willing to tell the truth will tell you that they've never seen anything like this. I mean, it's just the waste, the corruption, the nastiness, the controls, and this is what, of course, they want. They want all of America to be like an airport. We're all wait patiently in line. We're afraid to look them in the eye, or maybe we're supposed to look them in the eye, or otherwise you're a terrorist. And the blue shirts can do whatever they want to you, your children, your parents. You just have to go along, let them X-ray you, let them question you. You have no rights, and they've got total control. So that's what they
It's
like.
It's off the chart. When we come back, I'm gonna ask you. I don't know yet what's number one on Lew Rockwell's radar screen, LewRockwell.com. I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com, and I got a bunch of other news. We're going to raise with Lew coming up. We will be victorious. I want to get into politics, the election, with Lew Rockwell, who's a real expert on that, and the fact that Ron Paul has already won, as he wrote a few months ago in a piece. And I also want to read a quote out of Light and Liberty, Reflections on the Pursuit of Happiness, Thomas Jefferson. This is a book by Thomas Jefferson, re-edited and released. A guy came to my house and put this on my doorstep once. My wife got pretty mad, but it was a good book. Well, she had a 357 and told the guy to leave. He was knocking on our door at 10 o'clock at night trying to give me this, but I didn't know how close he came. But not a good idea to come to my house. Side issue. Let's go back to Lew Rockwell. Lew, grab bag of everything going on right now. What's front and center on your radar screen?
Well, it's so much bad that's happening, but I do notice Ron Paul just wrote about this, in fact, that there's a new, if you remember the SOPA bill, S-O-P-A, that was designed to take control of the internet in the name of so-called intellectual property. That bill was defeated, thank goodness. Now there's another one, even a worse one, called CISPA, C-I-S-P-A, and these bills are both designed by the recording industry and the movie industry and by the NSA and the FBI and the CIA and all that, to work together to crush the internet and to make sure that the movie industry and the recording industry can get what I would argue are unjust profits through the government. So it's in the name of stopping, quote unquote, theft on the internet that they want to take total control. They are. Before our eyes, of course, they are doing
rent-free
more
speech, make us pay for it, get rid of due process, instead of them going out and enforcing their so-called copyrights.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I would argue that both copyrights and patents are illegitimate grants of government monopoly, but the way that it was in the Constitution, everything was standable. But starting under the Reagan administration, this was stepped up to such a horrendous extent. One of the excuses was to keep Mickey Mouse in copyright. By the Disney company. And Ronald Reagan was always sort of the agent of the Hollywood mafia among his other roles in life. And so he, rolled over for them. And these things were put in. It keeps getting worse and worse. They keep extending their copyrights and
they're trying to say now you can't show a newspaper on TV, the lawyers are. And, of course, it's all made up. A lady called earlier and said the police are telling them you're not allowed to defend yourself in your home anymore because of the Zimmerman case, and that you've got to call, because a cop said so? That's just the way it is?
Well, you have the TSA invading flea markets looking for, allegedly counterfeit shirts. That somebody's producing a shirt that might look like allegedly like, a Gucci shirt or some expensive shirt. They were making an inexpensive shirt.
No judge, no jury. They just seize them.
Just go in, seize the property, put them in jail. So it's all a horrendous tyranny, and this is right across the world. The U.S. government uses this as a control. They're trying to extradite right now a boy from England who has Asperger's syndrome, and as a teenager put up a website that had on it links to BitTorrent sites and other sites where you could download movies. So just the fact that he had a site, which is not illegal in England, by the way, that had links to other sites, the U.S. government wants to take this kid, bring him back to this country, and put him in jail for 12 years. 12 years. And this is another thing going on in this country. Of course, the growth of the prison industrial complex. There was recently a black lady, a homeless lady, who had enrolled her child in a better school district than one she lived in. They're putting her in jail, again, for 12 years. 12 years. I mean, so one thing we always need to keep in mind is the people who work in the government have what St. Augustine called the libido dominandi, the lust to dominate, the lust to rule. They like to take us and do this. They get a charge out of this. They love this. So not only is the prison industrial complex making a lot of profits for people, a lot of these profits, prisons are profitable, and of course the government prisons are built by private industry and so forth. So there's always that thing. But people who work in the government love putting people in jail. They love starting wars. They like killing people.
They like torture.
These are not good people. We don't want them running our lives.
Well, that's right. I mean, who wants a job at the TSA grabbing women and children's genitals? I mean, and it's coming out that they enjoy it and like it and tell people so.
Well, when Ron Paul had his first experience with this, and it was horrendous. He has titanium knees, so he has to, when he goes commercial, he gets the full feel up.
Stay there. I want to hear the story on the other side. Long segment coming up. LewRockwell.com. He's our guest. We'll get into the election, a bunch of other news on the other side with Lew Rockwell, the consummate libertarian and right-hand man for many years to Ron Paul. We'll get his view on so many things coming up. Stay with us. Yeah, we see the Earth from here, and it is infested with gangs that call themselves government. Then there's these big mega corporations to a group that are all anti-free market, the big Fortune 100, shitting on top government, sucking through government off the population and corporate welfare and trying to make the general public dependent, and J.P. Morgan administering the welfare cards and the food stamps. And it is a nightmare. And Lew, I want you to finish your Ron Paul story, but then I want to just get this question out now. I'll do it after, but sure, people are waking up. But that's people that can tie their shoelaces. One way or the other, half the population is on the government mammary gland.
Yeah, and of course, this is a right after the Ron Paul story, I'll say a little bit more about that, but I'll just finish that this was the first time he had to go through the full TSA treatment. He has titanium knees, therefore, even if he wanted to go through the X-ray, he can't. They won't let him, and he got the extremely intrusive and horrendous examination by the TSA. And Ron said to the man, he said, "How can you stand to do a job like this?" And the man looked at him in the eye and said, "I love doing it." So yeah, they do. Of course, these are not. I mean, I'm sure there are some decent people out of the 40 or 50,000 TSA blue shirts who are caught up in this. They didn't have a job. They needed something. But really, the kinds of people who get hired by the government, if they're decent people, it's a mistake. It's a mistake they're in there. They don't want decent people in the government. They want people, again, who are willing to do this to you. That's their philosophy.
Listen, when like top movie stars in LAX now, it turns out stalkers are battling and doing anything they can to become TSA because it's Hollywood stars all day coming through, and they go crazy, and it's like a celebration. It's on video and photos, and they just grope them and grab them. And Miss USA, they go in her pants in Dallas because they knew who she was. And actually in her body. And listen, I was with Jesse Ventura. I have flown out of Vegas where I was doing a video shoot with Ventura, and the guy knew who I was and said, I have, quote, Lew, he actually said this, I have an administrative privilege. And he said, by the way, I heard your show yesterday from here in Vegas and all this, and was rubbing on me and getting off on the power of it, clearly getting off on it. And when I flew with Ventura out of Atlanta, they all knew who he was, were talking to him, and were taking their time squeezing his genitals, and I couldn't believe it. I started taking photos, and Ventura was embarrassed and said, stop, and he made me erase them, and he later sued him, of course, and it got thrown out, and they actually went. I don't want to go over it. The point is, Exactly. They told Ron Paul, I love it. They love it. Look how many are getting busted. Sorry, go ahead.
No, of course they love it. These are the kinds of people who go into the government, tend to go into the government. Not every postman is a bad guy, but the people who tend to go into the government are like this, and certainly the people who rise in the government. F.A. Hayek wrote a great chapter in his book, The Road to Serfdom, on why the worst rise to the top in government. Unlike in a private business, in private life, the worst do not tend to rise to the top. But in government, the worst people, the worst liars, the worst power mongers, the worst warmongers, the people who are just love all that's evil, they are the ones, the demagogues, they're the ones who rise to the top and become, president of the United States, for example. These are not the good guys. These are the worst people in society.
And he looked at Ron Paul. He told that story here on air. It made the Drudge Report. He looked at him and said, I love this job.
And he said, no, he said, I love it. Ron said to him, how can you stand doing a job like this? And he looked him in the eye and he said, I love it.
I love it.
So yeah, at least he told the truth for that moment. My guess is he wouldn't tell the truth in public, but he told the truth with great animus too. Of course, these people, they also hate us, by the way. As you point out, they talk about they're going to care for us. There's always they're helping the poor, they're helping the elderly, they're helping the sick, and so forth. They of course are hurting all these groups, and we could just see. If we think of the government has passed so many laws, very intrusive laws in the name of helping the disabled or in preventing assaults on children. So when the government was in control, of course, we see how they treat the disabled in the airports. We see how they treat children in the airports. Again, you can't believe a word they say, or rather, you can typically believe the opposite of what they say. So that's the rule of thumb.
Well, it's not typically. Look at the TSA. They lie on every subject and get caught and keep lying. And I just can't believe the American people turn their children over to them. So that's my next question. What do you do about half the population that can't survive without a government paycheck and who believe it's there? It's like that woman who had like 9 kids and was getting like all these dozens of welfare checks. And she said, I deserve more. What are you going to do for me?
Well, we have one of the things that democracy does. Hans Hermann Hoppe has a great book on this, Democracy, the God That Failed. Democracy has been a great invention for government. From a practical standpoint, we end up with Socialist A or Socialist B we can vote for, so they don't worry about who wins the election. But from a ideological standpoint, they convince people that we are the government. You hear Americans saying, "Should we go to Mars? Should we invade Syria?" It's not we doing this. It's this separate entity, this parasitical entity that's called the government and the military-industrial complex and so forth. So democracy has. You talked about earlier how in earlier times people saw the government as the rich people living in the castle and collecting taxes from them, and they correctly saw the government as something separate from them. Democracy makes us believe, entirely erroneously, that we are the government, and it blurs that distinction about who is, as John C. Calhoun said, who's the taxpayer and who's the tax eater. So yeah, there are a lot of people who are getting government checks. The government is still a minority, though. They can't, if they were the majority, the whole thing would collapse. They have to be a small minority. That is, those who are entirely living off the government. But by making a lot of other people a little bit living off the government, they hope to gain their loyalty. And I'm sorry to say they do gain their loyalty. So people are worried about, oh gosh, Social Security is going to go broke or Medicare is going to go broke. Although those things can't go broke any more than the Pentagon can go broke. As long as they got the printing press, they'll keep everything in existence because the dollar can be worthless, but all these things will be in existence because they exist for purposes of control. They don't exist to help people. They exist to make people subservient to the government, dependent on the government, mentally dependent on the government, and never to threaten everything. Always to go along, obey them, believe their baloney, whether it's taught in the public schools